Who is really in charge of the US-China tariff war? Just when everyone thought Washington would be the winner, a big surprise happened. The tables have turned 180 degrees. China, with its well-planned strategy and calculated moves, is now the master of the game. Does the US still have a chance to turn the tables? You probably remember the day President Donald Trump suddenly raised the banner of imposing heavy tariffs on Chinese goods. The whole world held its breath. Mr. Trump called it a symmetrical tariff, meaning that China, which sells a lot of goods to the US, now has to pay a proportional price. At that time, many people believed that the US had the upper hand. Everyone thought that China would have to back down, make concessions, or at least negotiate softly. But no. China did not choose to back down. In less than 48 hours, Beijing responded very quickly. They imposed retaliatory tariffs immediately, firmly, and decisively. Then suddenly, silence. No heated statements, no further escalation. The whole world was surprised again. China was silent, but not because of weakness. It was as if it was preparing for another move, much more sophisticated and profound. When the US-China tariff war entered a tense phase, everyone thought it was just a numbers game: impose tariffs, retaliate, then negotiate. But then China unexpectedly pulled out a trump card that few expected: rare earths, weapons no one can see but everyone must worry about. A material deep underground, not eye-catching, not flashy, but indispensable for the production of smartphones, electric car batteries, fighter jets, and even satellites. That material is rare earth. It may not sound important, but China has proven otherwise. On the world resource map, China holds 61% of the total global rare earth mining output. But that's only part of the story. The more dangerous part lies in refining, an extremely difficult, toxic, and expensive process. But it is the key to turning raw rare earths into materials that can be used in high technology. And in this game, China holds an almost unbeatable hand, controlling 92% of the world's rare earth refining capacity. Think of the global tech supply chain as a bottle of water. The water may come from many places, but the bottleneck, the place where the flow is determined, is China. Because of its almost unrivaled refining capabilities, China is becoming the throat of the global technology industry. Anyone who wants to produce an iPhone, a Tesla electric car, or a missile defense system must go through China's refined rare earth resources. And in the trade war, this is no longer an advantage, but a strategic weapon. Did you know that the iPhone you hold in your hand, the super-fast chips in your computer, or the Tesla electric cars running on the road, all consume a special material that is rare earth? Tech giants like Apple, Intel, AMD, Nvidia, and Tesla are all tied to the supply of rare earths, much of which is controlled by China. Since the early days of President Trump's term, the US has been trying to rebuild the rare earth supply chain right here in the country. But according to CNN, citing 3 leading US companies, expanding rare earth production will not be a quick process. They predict it will take years, even decades, to do so. Mr. Trump began imposing retaliatory tariffs on Chinese goods, with the first tariff being 34%. But the number did not stop there. The tariffs continued to increase to 84%, 104%, 145%, and then peaked at 245%. Can you imagine the import and export situation between the 2 largest economies in the world at that time? When the tariff reached 34%, almost all import and export activities froze. But the remarkable thing is that China does not need to continue to respond further. They just need to stay silent, holding tight to their rare earth card. Because with that monopoly position, they already have in their hands an advantage that cannot be measured by tariffs. When China saw America's weakness, they did not hesitate to act immediately. In late April 2025, they launched a deadly attack, tightening the export of 7 important rare earth elements, requiring companies to seek government permission if they want to export. Among the products being controlled is something seemingly trivial but extremely important: rare earth magnets. These are the heart of a series of devices we use every day, from phones and electric cars to airplanes and even MRI machines in hospitals. Speaking of aircraft and submarines, imagine an F-35 fighter jet needs 408 kilograms of rare earths. and a Virginia-class submarine needs nearly 4,200 kilograms. This means that China is holding an important key in the US defense industry. Not only that, from 2024, China will also ban the sale of two other extremely important elements, gallium and germanium, which are indispensable in the production of semiconductor chips, radars, and satellites. This action puts the US in a difficult situation, not only in the technology industry, but also in defense, making the war more tense and longer. While the US is tightening all border gates with Chinese goods, Beijing is not sitting still, but quickly turning to Europe, seeing it as a new potential strategic market. They have begun to boost rare earth exports to the EU, but at the same time they have sent an implicit warning. If Europe also decides to close its doors and cut off the supply of rare earths from China, the consequences will be dire. It is not just a shortage of raw materials for technology products, but also a direct impact on sensitive areas such as defense technology and nuclear energy, things that no country wants to lose the initiative in. In other words, China is putting the world in a new game, where rare earths are not only raw materials, but also global strategic cards. But China is not just playing with rare earths. Its second move is aimed directly at the global financial system, specifically the SWIFT payment network that the US and other Western countries still control. Instead of waiting to be clamped down, China, together with the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, joined hands to build a separate payment system called CIPS, short for Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. This is a new pipeline to connect more than 50 countries, allowing international transactions to use the yuan instead of the US dollar. CIPS 2.0 is even more impressive. While SWIFT took 72 hours to transfer $100,000 and cost nearly $5,000 in fees, CIPS 2.0 only cost 12 cents, and the transaction was almost instantaneous. What's more, the system also works without the internet, something SWIFT can't do. What's more, CCIPS 2.0 also integrates the digital yuan ECNY, opening up a future where China could challenge the dominance of the US dollar in global finance. The tariffs that the US imposed on China seemed to make them falter, but it was the US that suffered the heavier blow. The entire supply chain was disrupted, import prices skyrocketed, causing the domestic US economy to falter. In industrial states such as Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the number of people applying for unemployment benefits skyrocketed by 12%. According to the US Department of Labor, even the Consumer Price Index (CPI) in March 2025 increased by 0.9%, the highest level in more than a year. Not only the general economy, but also the tech giants have been hit hard. Apple, with its main assembly line at Foxconn in China, has had to raise the price of the iPhone from $100 to $160. Nvidia is struggling with a shortage of GPU chips and semiconductors, slowing down its plans to launch new products. Amazon is also not immune when Kindle and Fire TV are having trouble, leading to a decrease in profits. Microsoft has had to endure a 15 to 20% increase in costs for its Surface line. And Tesla is less heartbroken? Not at all. Sales fell 13%. Profits fell nearly 40%, causing Elon Musk to evaporate $44 billion in just 1 week. Thus, the tariffs that the US launched backfired, causing them to fall into a spiral of difficulties, while China still calmly maintained its position. Not only big tech corporations, but also American consumers, ordinary people, living paycheck to paycheck, are also beginning to feel the heat of the tariff war. According to the US Department of Commerce, in April 2025 alone, inventories at retail chains fell by 11.2%, the lowest level since the pandemic. The reason? The cost of importing goods from Asia increased by 19%, causing goods to not arrive on time and prices to keep climbing. People, fearing a shortage of essential goods, rushed to stockpile. Supermarket shelves were bare and distribution systems were overloaded, unable to keep up with the surge in demand. Even retail giants like Walmart and Costco struggled. Walmart raised prices on essentials by 8%, but that still couldn't save its first quarter 2025 profit, which fell 17%. Costco didn't fare much better, with its profit falling 12.6%. From manufacturing plants to retail chains to American kitchens, the domino effect of the trade war is more evident than ever. Amid the tense tariff war, one might think China would be cornered. But no, Beijing has played a different game. slow, steady, and extremely methodical. According to major newspapers such as Global Times and People's Daily, China has prepared well in advance. They have not only achieved technological self-sufficiency, but also maintained financial stability, two things that are extremely important in a protracted war. And interestingly, even the Western media had to nod in agreement. They called China's response calculated, well-controlled, not rushing headlong into conflict, but gradually wearing down the opponent. As China remained calm, the US began to back down. Offers for dialogue were made, not out of goodwill, but because Washington was starting to feel uneasy internally. The game is different now. The one who thought he was in control now has to learn to play by the opponent's rules. After all the tensions, tariffs, rare earth restrictions, and financial tug-of-war, what has surprised many people the most is how China has responded. No rush, no resentment. Beijing chooses to keep still to control movement, keeping quiet when necessary, flexible when necessary, but always ready to counterattack if pushed to the limit. The most impressive thing? They not only withstand, but turn pressure into opportunity. Rather than simply react, China has quietly poured money into core technology sectors, industries where it previously relied on the West, and reshuffled its entire supply chain to avoid being squeezed again. Not stopping there, Beijing also accelerated the expansion of its domestic market, then reached out to Europe and developing countries, places that are thirsty for cheap supplies and technology. In other words, while the US launched seemingly fatal blows, China was quietly turning the tables, not to win a single battle, but to win the long-term war. Finally, after a series of back-and-forth blows, the chessboard began to turn. Although it was the US that fired the first shot in the tariff war, the one who felt the consequences was Washington. As the domestic economy was under pressure, technology suffered from component shortages, and people faced rising prices, China stood firm. Not only that, Beijing also took advantage of that turbulent time to strengthen diplomatic relations. They promoted the Belt and Road Initiative, signed more free trade agreements, FTAs, expanding their influence not only economically, but also geopolitically. And then, the surprise came. After months of tense negotiations, the two superpowers have agreed to sit down in Switzerland, where the talks are often pivotal. But the big question still hangs in the air. Is this a sign of concession, or just a step back to prepare for a more fierce confrontation? The answer still awaits the next move.